Chair Kenyanya, you can go ahead and start. We are live.
Thank you. I call to order this meeting of the Audit and Compliance Committee of the University of Minnesota's Board of Regents. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you all for being here. And as you know, we're continuing to participate in this hybrid format with Vice Chair Rocha and myself virtually, and Regents Verhalen, Swigum, Taurabe, and Davenport at McNamara Alumni Center there on the Twin Cities campus. We have a good agenda today and a lot of things to discuss. We also have two student representatives with us, Riley Tuft from the UMD campus and Flora Yang from the Twin Cities campus. Thank you both for joining us and for representing your peers. But before moving on to the agenda, I want to take if you'll indulge me, I want to take a brief moment. As you're all aware, Chief Auditor Klatt retired, and we're currently being capably led by Interim Chief Auditor Coons. The search is well underway. Regent Davenport and myself have the honor of serving on that committee, and that is being chaired by Regent Swigum. I want to give Regent Swigum a chance to offer a brief update on the search for your awareness. Regent Swigum.
Brief and very, very general, as you would also expect. The committee has met actually three different times regarding the chief auditor search. Mr. Chairman, we had a search committee working for us from AGV. We now have come upon some interviews that we will be doing with individuals, I think in the week following this one. And of course, the board will then be engaged in November for the recommendations of the semifinalists from the committee, as well as the interviews to take place. As you know, Mr. Chairman, this is a direct board report, and the regents, the board, will be making the direct final decision on this position. But we've got some very, very good candidates, and looking forward to someone serving us for the next 27 years at the University of Minnesota.
Thank you. Thank you, Regent Swigum. Additionally, I have withdrawn my candidacy from the position for those who are wondering. But thank you for the update. Any questions for Regent Swigum on that? All right, seeing none, and Ms. Flatten can confirm that there are none.
None in the boardroom, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. We will turn to our agenda. We have two very important items. First is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Program. For this, we have Interim Vice President for Research, Michael Oakes, and Pat Briscoe, the Exports Control Officer. This is a great example of the breadth of Audit and Compliance Committees, right? We're talking about something that's very important to research and other aspects, and on another day, we may be discussing something that relates to academics and athletics. But as they are preparing the presentation, I'm going to turn it over to Interim Chief Auditor Coons.
Thank you, Chair Kenyanya, members of the committee. Like the chair said, Interim Vice President for Research Michael Oakes and Export Controls Officer Pat Briscoe are here today to talk to you about the university's commitment to open research without restrictions. However, those restrictions are actually becoming more common, and that's where the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC, comes in. These are upcoming data security standards from the Department of Defense. While this is still emerging and not yet finalized, the university is working towards compliance with these standards. So Dr. Oakes and Mr. Briscoe will walk you through where we are today and where we're headed.
Interim Vice President Oakes.
Thank you, Regent Kenyanya. Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael Oakes. I'm serving as Interim Vice President. And to my right is Mr. Pat Briscoe. He works on our Risk Intelligence and Compliance team, REACT, and his specialty is foreign involvement and export controls. And I think you'll have a wonderful presentation from us, certainly him this morning. We're talking about data security this morning, which can be a little bland, but it actually has very important implications for the university and the work we do. You can see the title, cybersecurity, that's rather self-evident. Maturity model, this is a new way from the federal government, particularly the DoD, Department of Defense, to think about how we have appropriate, in their eyes, cybersecurity or data security efforts. Pretty simple agenda for us this morning. We're going to talk about the background issue, the impact on us here at the University of Minnesota, what we are doing moving forward, and then, of course, plenty of time for any questions. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Briscoe now to sort of lay the background for the core issues.
Thank you, Vice President Oaks, and good morning, everybody. It's nice to be in the building in person and see as many people as possible. So I want to frame the issue a little bit here by talking about the baseline university posture. This has to do, or is a reflection chiefly of the openness and research policy that we have here at the University of Minnesota. There's a regents policy and then an implementing administrative policy. Essentially, this policy states that we shall not accept research restrictions on participation and dissemination or publication of research results, except in compelling circumstances. This policy effectively encourages academic freedom, free exchange of ideas, and most of our research is obviously subject to this policy by a long shot. We are, however, encountering and have been encountering with increasing frequency over the past 3 or 4 years, restrictions from certain federal sponsors and the DoD in particular that come into tension with that openness and research policy. Some of the implications of that tension we'll be discussing today, in particular the CMMC program being implemented by the Department of Defense. The CMMC program is a new and fairly labor-intensive effort by the Department of Defense to raise the cybersecurity maturity and compliance of members of the defense industrial base. And the defense industrial base is perhaps a misleading term. It includes essentially every organization, not only in the US, but overseas, that has US Department of Defense contracts or subcontracts. There are different definitions, but that's essentially the way to think about it. And most research universities in the United States have some sort of defense contracting work. Maybe not a lot, certainly not as much as a proportion of its work as an organization like Northrop Grumman. But every major research university that I know of has some sort of defense contract or subcontracting, and certainly the University of Minnesota does. So again, the goals of the CMMC program are to increase cybersecurity compliance, discipline standards among members of the defense industrial base, and also importantly, to give the Department of Defense greater confidence in the compliance. So it's both raising the standards and giving DoD greater comfort that the standards are being met through a process that we'll discuss shortly. This is a very rough timeline. We're not including every step by any means, but in early 2020, from the university, the academic community's perspective, the rubber started to hit the road. DoD finalized the controls, the list of controls that CMMC will be implementing. There are 173 total. We also saw, indications of the kind of implementation plan and process. Things got real in September of 2020. That's when the Department of Defense published a final interim rule in the Federal Register that creates contract clauses that will actually start to bind contractors to compliance with the applicable CMMC standards. We are currently towards the end of the first year of what DoD in September 2020 stated would be a 5-year implementation plan. So within the first year, there would be pilot contracts and associated subcontracts. And I think the pilot contracts numbered at around 6 or 7 major important contracts for DoD and associated subcontracts. So those would be subject to CMMC at different levels. By the end of the 5-year implementation period, if all goes according to plan, then the notion is all new contracts and subcontracts within scope would be subject to some sort of CMMC compliance requirements. The requirements are determined on a contract by contract basis. So not every DoD contract will have the same CMMC control requirements. The CMMC program operates differently from the previous DoD cybersecurity regime in a couple of different ways. First of all, there's this tiered 5-level security system. So The existing previous system is something called NIST Special Publication 800-171. And I apologize, NIST is National Institute for Standards and Technologies. So NIST SP 800-171. And essentially, if we had an in-scope DoD contract, we had to meet, we're expected to meet the requirements in NIST 800-171. With CMMC, there are now 5 different levels. And so DoD determines on a contract by contract basis, again, which level applies to that particular opportunity. And an organization has to have a certification that meets the level of security for that particular contract. So at the risk of stating the obvious, if an opportunity comes out and DoD says, okay, this is a level 3 CMMC contract, only contractors that have a CMMC level 3 certification are eligible to bid on that particular opportunity. The other big difference is that we don't get to certify ourselves. Certifications have to come from external third-party certifying organizations. And those organizations themselves have to be certified or accredited by the Department of Defense. So it's in a way kind of a pre-audit. You're getting a clean bill of health prior to representing to DoD that you can meet certain security levels or controls as required by the particular opportunity contract. We also have to pay the outside evaluators for the certification. We don't pay for the certification, we pay for the process that hopefully results in a certification that allows for bidding on particular opportunities. This is a very rough overview of sort of the level philosophy that DoD has put out. Again, there are, I think, in total, up to level 5, about 173 different controls. At level 1, I think it's 15 or 17, something like that. So this image gives you a sense for the fact that the levels build on each other. So for level 1 contract, an organization has to have a level 1 certification. For a level 5 contract, all previous levels controls have to be met, as well as the specific controls unique to level 5. Right now, sort of the rough thinking is that most DoD contracts that a typical university might expect to receive in this area is likely to require something along the lines of level 3, because that's essentially what has been the case, plus an additional 20 controls or so.
Thanks, Pat. We'll share a little bit now about some of the impact on us as an institution, as a research university. Thank you. First, we want to share that some universities who have been doing lots of work in this space over many years are more prepared. And that's nothing to be especially worried about, but just to appreciate that as we move forward in this process, we here at the University of Minnesota will have to do some work with folks like Mr. Briscoe and, of course, computer experts. As this whole process moves forward, we'll have to tech up and we'll have to spend some resources. The scope of this data security initiative, the CMMC, is really to address the issue of data at certain levels of security clearance in the most simple way. And there are various levels, and this is obviously a very simple presentation. One of the terms used is controlled unclassified information, or CUI. And this is for data, information that is not normally available to the public, such as a typical research study and publication. So this is where the Regents policy about openness research sort of grinds up against this. So we have CUI in relatively few areas at the university, and this is what sort of must be addressed. Then there's the Covered Defense Information, or CDI, and this is really a similar notion to the CUI, but it's specific to the Department of Defense. And then, of course, as things go, there's federal contract information, and Mr. Briscoe shares with me that's sort of a CUI light in terms of technology and security. So these are the sort of areas of information that will be controlled at different levels going forward. Obviously, the University of Minnesota does all kinds of extraordinary research and has impact on the world, and certainly Minnesota. Some of the areas that are of, I guess, primary concern or primary oversight is our work in aerospace and hypersonics especially. And to be simple, this is stuff, missiles, and other things that go real fast. And we do some really foundational science in this, and it's really remarkable work. Quantum computing, really a new way to do computer science and related electrical engineering, artificial intelligence and robotics, biotechnology. As some of you know, we're moving forward fast and furious and really amazing in this space, microprocessors and other things. So these are the things that go on at different levels in our large research enterprise. And as this CMMC requirement unfolds, this will be the areas that are most affected in terms of our research. In this broad conversation, as I've sort of hinted at, there's all these definitions. And one of the definitions is fundamental research. This is a term of art in this area. And what it really means is, basic and applied research that is typically published, typically shared with the world. And this is what our scientists and researchers are doing all the time in this space. So fundamental research is generally not covered by some of these security requirements. In the new framework coming, the CMMC, we're not yet sure, and persons like Mr. Briscoe are paying close attention to what extent fundamental research will be covered, if at all. So as we've mentioned, this is an evolving area. And so it's very important if we do have fundamental research covered, then this will be probably level 1 in that tier chart we showed you. But this will require substantial changes to how we do data security and related safety procedures. That, of course, if we were just simple, costs money and time. If we don't move forward with the preparation for the CMMC model, which will be coming, it's just a matter of how and what, we will be at a competitive disadvantage. The university's research world in hypersonics and all the rest, as I mentioned, really major growth areas, and I dare say with substantial impact to do good in the world. So we need to pay attention to this. We don't want to be ineligible, but what we're trying to do with many efforts you'll see in a moment is try to right size our response. So we're doing the best thing to be competitive, but not overdoing it and in some sense wasting time and money. So push come to shove, not moving forward in this space is a loss of opportunities, and in my language, a loss of potential impact doing good in the world. Pat, back to you.
Thank you, Vice President Oaks. So what have we done so far? Well, prior to the rollout, the announcement of the CMMC program, the university did start to make some efforts in the restricted data space. So there have been some efforts to implement NIST SP 800-171 in a couple of environments in different colleges. Again, very rare, in large part because of the openness and research policy and a lot of the good consequences that flow from that. But this is not, this kind of research and these kind of controls are not entirely new to us. In 2020 and early 2021, OVPR and the
That's the Office of Vice President.
What's that?
Office of Vice President.
I'm sorry. Yes, Office of the Vice President for Research. And the Office of Information, OIT, Office of Information Technology, thank you. I'm not used to saying them all out loud. So. In 2020 and early 2021, OVPR and OIT constituted a highly restricted data standing committee, HRDSC, which consists of a number of stakeholders from IT security, from IT infrastructure, from OVPR, including myself, to start wrapping our hands around issues like this. CMMC is a key one, but it's not necessarily the only one we're looking at. So a couple of the things that are happening or have happened, one, a group called Campus Guard has done a gap assessment of an environment within the Minnesota Supercomputing Institute to see, how that currently complies with some of these standards, and what might be necessary to get to a particular set of new standards, if applicable. We're also looking at inviting an expert from another university to come in, probably virtually, to look at kind of what our current posture is, what's our current capability to comply with some of these newer requirements in CMMC, just to give us a ballpark estimate of what kind of costs and effort might be required to bump up to level 2, level 3, something along those lines. We're also starting to develop a better sense for how much of an appetite is there for restricted research within the university. We have some provisional anecdotal evidence, but we're trying to get a bigger picture sense. How many researchers want to pursue restricted research? What kind of opportunities by number of proposals are we looking at? What are those lost opportunities if we don't move forward, in other words? And also we're trying to get, again, a clearer sense for the cost. And so those two initiatives I mentioned on the first slide are part of that big picture assessment. We do want to discuss the openness in research policy. And again, there's both a Regents policy, which is one thing, and then an administrative policy that implements it. And that is a little easier to discuss and change because it goes up for, in fact, I believe next year is the next comprehensive review for that policy. Just to see if what's working, what works well, maybe what things might be improved. Does this policy align well with our peers? Are there maybe some changes we can make in process that help us align and again make us a little bit more competitive with peers who have different processes that maybe aren't so onerous or difficult? The plan is to develop, after some of this provisional assessment work, to develop a more formal, thorough gap analysis. This stuff is very intricate, very detailed. And of course, we're a large, complicated organization. So we really need to get a better sense for, we've done some provisional work, but we really need to get some granular insights into where we are now and where we think we need to be in 3 or 4 or 5 years. And again, in connection with that, we're looking at a more formal cost benefit analysis so that we can actually develop options for management to start applying resources, both financial and labor hours, essentially. It is important to note that the costs, we're not just talking about buying new routers and new computers and new software. These requirements, they are all about cybersecurity, but there are human resources requirements as far as training, background checks, making sure that people need to have access to the information they have access to. There are all kinds of governance, risk assessment, audit requirements associated with these things. So it's not a matter of just plunking down some number of dollars to buy a new room with a few servers in it. This is sort of just a miscellaneous slide of things that are impacting how we're thinking about CMMC. So one thing that we're watching very closely, of course, is how DoD is implementing CMMC. Again, I mentioned we're at the end of the first year of a 5-year implementation period. DoD has actually stated it plans to release a report by the end of the year to kind of summarize how the pilot contracts went, what's working, what's not. So some of the things that certainly members of the regulated community are talking about are the lack of certified or the lack of accredited certifiers. So they're just now getting certifiers out. I say just now, it has been happening over the past year or so. But when you're talking about potentially 100,000, 200,000, maybe more members of the defense industrial base who all have to get certifications, a dozen qualified certifiers aren't going to be able to cover that kind of demand. So there are some concerns just about the supply and demand of certifiers. Costs can be significant. Again, I mentioned you've got to pay the certifiers to come in and look at your organization, just like you would pay outside auditors to come in and look at your organization. But one also has to invest in the infrastructure to get to particular levels. And some smaller businesses are balking at that, especially if DoD work is only a small percentage of their overall portfolio. At a certain point, they're spending so much on compliance and not earning enough on the DoD work that they might walk away from it. They're so vocal about this that they have gone to Congress and made public statements through associations and so on. And there are folks in the Hill who are listening. And for example, there's some pending legislation. I don't know, it hasn't been enacted yet, but it directs DOD to do an assessment of the impact of the CMMC program on, in particular, small businesses, and I believe possibly universities as well. The rule was developed, understandably, with DOD and industry thinking and priorities at the fore. We understand that, but hopefully DOD is thinking a little bit more about some of the adjacent issues like the impact on universities and fundamental research, which we're also, as Vice President Oaks indicated, we're also waiting to hear how DOD views that. So as a result, there's some skepticism about the 5-year implementation plan. DOD hasn't said it's changing that, but it has hit some bumps along at least the first year that might eventually result in an adjustment of the timetable. Should mention one reason we're bringing this up is because it might not be limited to DOD. Right now it is. The CMMC program is a DOD-specific initiative. It only applies to DOD contracts and subcontracts, and in fact, only certain DOD contracts and subcontracts. But the Departments of Homeland Security and Education have publicly stated that they are watching the DOD's implementation of CMMC and are thinking about sometime in the future implementing something similar, if not sort of a wholesale borrowing of the framework and the controls. That would apply certainly to any sponsored research that's contracted, again, within the scope of the CMMC requirements. It's conceivable, though, that if the Department of Education liked the CMMC approach enough, it might apply it to other information that is within its jurisdiction to regulate. So it is possible, I don't know, it's a bit outside my field, that student data might have to be protected at some point in accordance with some sort of CMMC level certification.
So in conclusion, this is a very important issue, cybersecurity. It impacts many areas of the university's research enterprise. It could expand in scope, yet it is still evolving. I'd like to share that I think we're in a very good position. I and Mr. Briscoe and others are working very closely to watch what's going on in Washington and to prepare at least models or opportunities how we'll proceed forward, not only cost analyses, but other kinds of operational changes. And so there's just a substantial amount of teamwork that I think will benefit the university. And with that, Chair Kenyanya, I conclude our formal presentation. We are delighted to take questions.
Thank you, VP Oaks and Mr. Briscoe, for that very, very important and in-depth presentation. As committee members get their hands raised, I'll start us off. I obviously heard this presentation, but was aware of the topic and that it was coming. Perhaps just due to the title, I was just thinking cybersecurity. But as listening to it, that research, openness and research piece is really what's catching my attention. That's very fundamental, especially for a public land grant institution, right? To keep that core principle. And I know you both mentioned that what that will look like is unknown, but it does seem that there's at least and to be a little more private and proprietary by the DoD and some of that stuff. You referred to the policy, and I pulled it up just to look at it, and you referred to compelling reasons. Currently, we look to compelling reasons why we wouldn't openly disseminate results, and the policy just refers to a review process specified in administrative procedures. Can you shed light into how we currently determine when it's appropriate to not openly disseminate results and what those procedures currently are?
Chair Kenyanya, Regents, let me just first begin by saying this is a small part of our large portfolio of research, so I want to keep it in scale for you. And Mr. Briscoe, you could share about how exactly this review process goes forward and some of the examples, if you might.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman Kenyanya. And the compelling reasons typically relate to the benefits of a particular type of research. So if it can be demonstrated that the national security benefits are sufficient, and that the downsides are not material, then typically an exception will be approved in those cases. Downsides that would very likely result in an exception being denied or substantially conditioned, include impacts on students, for example. The review process really wants to take account of possible restrictions that may impact the student's ability to publish a thesis. But some of the compelling justifications that we've seen largely have to do with, again, national security work. Also, very often, some of these conditions will hit a contract sort of, or project mid-execution. So there's an amendment or an extension, and the government will, for whatever reason, at that point, impose a condition. So either the work stops, the project ceases prematurely, or we pursue an exception through the process.
Could you speak for a moment about how the process works?
Oh, certainly. So the way the process works is we identify, again, typically during award negotiations, that a contract is subject to participation and publication restrictions. The researcher works with my office and sponsor projects, and also with General Counsel's office to develop a case. We have a form that's used. That form is submitted to the Faculty Senate Research Committee. There's an openness and research subcommittee that the form is then delegated to. They evaluate the request. If there are questions, they can contact the PI. They can contact any of us involved in reviewing and completing portions of the form. In the before times, we occasionally all met in person when the subcommittee met. The subcommittee would typically come up with a recommendation, which would then get elevated to the research committee. And then that recommendation would come back to OVPR. And finally, the vice president for research would make the official final determination.
Thank you for the clarification, Mr. Briscoe. Regent Swiggum.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Maybe VP Oaks, I could have you just expand a little bit upon what Mr. Briscoe said about the cost benefit involved in our certification. It seems like level 5 is obviously less costly as you go to each level to meet certain certification. It becomes more costly, both in terms of software, money, people, whatever. Do you plan then, when you get to cost benefit analysis, to say, well, we're going to go to level 3. We can afford that with the value we get in DoD contracts or whatever, but level 4, level 5 is not in the realm of a cost benefit. Is that a value decision you're going to make as we go forward?
Vice President Oaks.
Yep. Chair Kenyanya, Regent Swiggum, thank you for the great question. My view is this should be a well-consulted process. So there's a lot of homework to do, a lot of analyses to do, and ultimately we want to see how much need or demand there is and what our strategic priorities for this kind of work at the university, obviously consulting the president and the provost. And then we'll have a consultation with faculty partners, and then ultimately we'll make a recommendation, and I suppose with the president's consent, that would be my decision in the area, but it wouldn't just be me in a vacuum. This is a very important element for the university, and we would be happy to come back to this committee or others as you wish to explain or at least share what we think is best. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Vice President Oaks, kind of just following up on Regent Swiggum's question there. I think it might be interesting, perhaps, when you enter this analysis, probably working with OIT to identify what investments are probably needed anyway, right? Just in terms of just to have a good cybersecurity posture, right? I mean, that's a topic this committee's interested in and we'll be discussing further. But it may be that, VP Glacek and his shop looks at it and says, these 4 things we kind of want to do anyway, whether we implement this or not, and that may, kind of dampen some of the investment because it's not solely about this model. Do we have any idea if there's some overlap there?
Chair Kenyanya, thank you. Yes, there's obviously constant moving going forward with OIT, and the vice president there to make sure we're always having appropriate security. And so the analysis would be the, in my terms, marginal cost or the extra cost to achieve certain levels of the CMMC framework so that our researchers can be eligible and we can contribute in this space. So it wouldn't just be, I mean, I think it would be inappropriate to say, here's the cost of CMMC without the normal appreciation of the normal costs for advancing data security, which I know OIT in particular is always trying to lead in that space. Thank you, sir.
Yep, thank you. Ms. Watton, do we have any other questions in the boardroom?
We do not, Mr. Chair.
Okay, VP Oaks, any closing remarks?
No, I'd just like to thank the committee, Chair Kenyanya, and we're happy to come back as you wish. And I just want to thank my colleague and friend, Mr. Briscoe, just does an outstanding job in this area. And I think we should all be very proud to have him as a teammate. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you both for the presentation. Thank you, committee members, for the discussion. And I think we'll now turn to agenda item 2. So agenda item 2 is our internal audit update. And without further ado, I will pass it on to the interim chief auditor.
Thank you, Chair Kenyanya, members of the committee. You'll find our internal audit update on page 24 of your docket materials. This is a standard update that you can expect to see 3 times a year from us. I'll just quickly point out a few highlights in there. On page 25, you'll find that our essential recommendation follow-up implementation rate this period is 36%. That compares favorably with our expected or goal rate of 40%, and it's much improved from our report to you in February, which was 27%. You'll also see that we filled our vacant IT auditor position. We're really excited about this. That position had been open for 2 years. It will greatly impact our ability to complete audit work across the university in the IT space. This individual has over 20 years of IT experience at the university, so we're really excited to have them. So you as board members can expect to see an increase in IT audit work in the near future from us. And then on page 47 is our audit activity report. You'll note that we completed 9 audits in this last period. A summary of those audit results and the control charts are available on page 49. You'll also see that we have 8 audits currently in progress, with a few more just in the starting days, so they didn't even make the report yet. And with that, I'm open to any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from committee members? Ms. Flatten?
No hands in the boardroom, Mr. Chair.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for the update. Just want to point out that, you were talking about hiring an IT auditor, and that just followed with our last presentation. Just kind of continues to show how important, making sure we're compliant and secure in that space is, as well with our anticipated continued discussion of this topic in December. And if there are no other questions or comments on—
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I apologize. Regent Swigum has his hand raised.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Flatten. Regent Swigum.
Chair Kenyanya, just a quick question, if I could, of Kelly regarding audit activity report. When maybe a year and a half ago, under Chair Rocha, I believe we had a discussion over potential audits to be done, and some of us made suggestions as to some of the particular potential audits. I made 2 of them, in fact, and I don't see either of them here, either as completed or continued or began or anything of that nature, any of that status. How do I follow up, and to whom do I follow up to see if my suggestions of audit programs would be forthcoming or not?
Regent Swigum, Chair Kenyanya. I'm not entirely sure of the process. I believe that would have to go through the chair, though. Chair Kenyanya, is that correct?
Yeah, thank you. Regent Swigum, so if you'll remember last year, we were not operating under an audit plan just due to the ambiguity and uncertainty of COVID. We did make one this year, even with the change. If the audits you suggested did not make it there, I mean, you can certainly still submit those to myself for consideration. If Regent Rocha is available, he might have more insight into those specifically, because I know he's the one you were working with in the last year. Vice Chair Rocha.
Yeah, you got me here. Let's see here. There we go. Yeah, on the specific questions, I don't, as the chair of the committee, was not in the position to necessarily dictate those specific audit items. We passed them forward to the auditor's office and through the board office, and I don't really have a whole lot more to offer than that, as other than to say that evaluating what was put forward on our agenda, if they didn't make it to that point, we weren't in. I don't recall us in the leadership position of dictating that, but that's something I think that is a continuing dialogue as to how much regents themselves have the ability to call for that. I think it's valuable. I think that I felt Regent Swigham's requests were appropriate, and I would like to have seen them move forward, but I don't have a whole lot more to add than that.
Regent Swiggum, yeah, I mean, I think the reduced capacity of the audit function, just with responding to COVID, may have had something to do with that. I'd certainly be happy to if you'd resubmit those, pass them along. I'm not sure if we'd want to do that now or after we identify, and finish the search. Either, I mean, that's really up to you. I'd be comfortable doing it either way. Regent Swiggum?
Mr. Chairman, I will wait. I can have a conversation with you and former Chair Rocha at a later time. And I'm very patient. So, Mr. Chair, that'd be fine.
And
You are patient. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, this is Regent Rocha. Your point on the adjustments for COVID, I think, is very apt, and that was what, at that moment, as with much of what we were doing as an institution and as a board, things were definitely placed on hold in order to react to the changes that were coming in adjusting for the remarkable year that we had gone through. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And I certainly understand and respect that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Regent Swiggum. And that's even reflected in the update we just got with the implementation rate, which was only at 27% in February. And now we're back at 36%. Even the units were obviously going through challenges and responding to audits in the first place. But as you said, you are patient, so feel free to to have that conversation with myself and Vice Chair Rocha at your leisure. Thank you, Regent Swiggum. Any other questions or comments from the committee? All right. Seeing and hearing none, that brings us to the end of our agenda today. Before we adjourn, I will remind you all that we'll have a brief break, but we'll reconvene promptly at 9:45 a.m. for the Mission Fulfillment Committee. There being no additional business before the committee, we are now adjourned.